The rain was falling hard on the day they lowered the casket into the ground, matching the heavy gray sky above. Martha stood under a black umbrella, clutching it so tightly her knuckles turned white. Beside her stood her son, David, and his wife, Lisa. They were dressed in expensive dark wool coats, shifting their weight from foot to foot, looking at their watches more than they looked at the grave. They were there out of duty, not grief. Martha felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the weather. For 50 years, she had shared a life, a home, and a heartbeat with her husband. Now, she was standing alone, feeling like a tree that had been chopped down at the roots. When the service ended, David offered to drive her home, but his tone was clipped. "We have a dinner reservation, Mom. We can't stay long," he said as he opened the car door for her. Martha nodded silently. She knew better than to ask them to come in for tea. She watched their car speed away down the street, leaving her in the silence of the empty driveway. She walked into the house she had lived in for 3 decades. The air smelled stale, and the silence was deafening. She sat in her husband's armchair, staring at the wall, waiting for a feeling that never came. She just felt empty. 3 days later, the reality of the situation came crashing down harder than the rain at the funeral. A man in a sharp gray suit sat at her kitchen table. He was from the bank. He spoke in a low, professional voice, using words like reverse mortgage and outstanding debt and foreclosure. Martha tried to follow him, but her head was spinning. She had always trusted her husband to handle the money. He had always told her not to worry, that everything was taken care of. But it wasn't he. The man slid a paper across the table. "Mrs. Martha, the house has to be sold to cover the debts. There is nothing left for you to keep." She looked at the paper, but the numbers blurred together. "Nothing," she whispered. "What about my pension? What about our savings?" The man shook his head slowly. "Gone. The medical bills and the loans took everything. You have your monthly pension check, but it is very small. You will not be able to afford a place on your own, not in this city." Martha felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her. She looked around the kitchen at the curtains she had sewn, the table where they had eaten breakfast every morning, the photos on the fridge. It was all going to be taken away. She was 68 years old, and she had nowhere to go. The panic rose in her chest, making it hard to breathe. There was only one option, one person she could call, even though it scared her to do it. That evening, she picked up the phone and dialed David. He answered on the 4th ring. "Hello Mom, is everything okay?" he asked, sounding annoyed that he was interrupted. "David," Martha said, her voice trembling. "I need help. The bank man came today. They are taking the house. I don't have any money. I have nowhere to live." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Martha could hear the TV playing in the background. She waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. Finally, David sighed loudly. "You have got to be kidding me," he muttered. He didn't say it to her, but she heard it. "I mean, didn't Dad handle the finances? How does this happen?" "I don't know, David. Please. I just need a room. Just until I figure out the pension. I won't be a burden." Another silence. Then, Lisa's voice in the background, sharp and complaining. David covered the phone with his hand, but muffled sounds of an argument floated through the line. Martha's face burned with shame. She was begging her own son for shelter. It was the lowest moment of her life. Finally, David came back on the line. Fine, Mom. You can come stay. But we don't have a lot of space. You'll have to stay in the guest room, which is basically David Jr.'s playroom right now. And you can't be under our feet all the time. Lisa is very stressed with work. Oh, thank you, David. Thank you, Martha cried, tears streaming down her face. I will help. I will cook and clean. I promise I won't be in the way. Yeah, okay. Pack your stuff. I'll come by tomorrow with the truck. The next few days were a blur of cardboard boxes and heartbreak. Martha had to sort through a lifetime of belongings. She could only take what fit into the back of David's truck. She gave away her good china to the neighbors, sold her living room set for a fraction of what it was worth, and donated her husband's clothes to charity. It felt like she was throwing away her memories, piece by piece. By the time she was done, she had 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of photo albums, and a small box of knickknacks. That was all that was left of her life. When David arrived, he didn't get out of the truck to help. He sat in the driver's seat, tapping on the steering wheel, looking impatient as Martha struggled to lift the heavy boxes down the porch stairs. A neighbor from across the street, a young man she had barely spoken to, ran over to help her. Let me get that for you, Martha, he said kindly, lifting the boxes with ease. David just watched, scrolling on his phone. They drove in silence to David's house. It was a large, modern house in a fancy subdivision, far from the cozy neighborhood Martha had lived in. The lawn was perfectly manicured, and the cars in the driveway were shiny and new. Martha knew that she and her husband had helped David buy this house. They had given him the down payment years ago when he got married. They had drained their own savings to help him get a start in life. She never thought she would be moving in as a charity case. Lisa met them at the door. She was dressed in yoga clothes, holding a cup of coffee. She didn't smile. You can put the boxes in the sunroom, she said, pointing to a glass-walled room at the back of the house. We haven't cleared out the guest room yet. The sunroom was cold and bright, filled with the smell of wet dogs and old furniture. It felt more like a garage than a bedroom. That evening, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Martha offered to make dinner, desperate to be useful. She chopped vegetables and stirred a pot of soup with the same care she always had, hoping the smell of comfort food would soften them. But when they sat down to eat, Lisa picked at her food and sighed. We usually eat paella, Martha. So, this is just, very heavy for us, she said, pushing the bowl away. David didn't even look up from his plate. He just ate quickly, scrolling through messages on his phone. I'm sorry, Martha whispered. I just thought. I can make eggs next time. Whatever you like. It's fine, David snapped. Just don't make a habit of cooking whatever you want. We have a routine here. Martha looked at her son. This wasn't the boy she had raised. This wasn't the child who used to run to her when he scraped his knee. He was a stranger, and he was looking at her like she was an annoyance he wanted to switch off. Later that night, as she tried to sleep on a lumpy pull-out couch in the sunroom, she heard David and Lisa arguing in their bedroom. Their voices were low but angry. She's going to live forever, Lisa hissed. She is going to take over our whole life. I can't stand this, David. Martha pulled the blanket up over her head to block out the sound, but she couldn't block out the truth. She had lost her home, her money, and her dignity. And now, she was beginning to realize, she had lost her son, too. She closed her eyes, terrified of what tomorrow would bring, unaware that the worst was yet to come. Weeks turned into a month, and the sunroom began to feel less like a temporary stop and more like a prison cell. Martha woke up every morning at 5 a.m., not because she wanted to, but because she needed to. She wanted to be invisible. She would creep quietly to the kitchen to start the coffee and empty the dishwasher, trying to erase any trace of her existence before David and Lisa woke up. She felt like a ghost haunting her own family's life, floating through the hallways, careful not to make a sound that would trigger their annoyance. The dynamic in the house shifted quickly. At first, Martha tried to be a mother, asking David about his job or Lisa about her day. But Lisa would usually just roll her eyes or put her headphones in. David would give short, one-word answers. Eventually, Martha stopped asking. She realized that her presence was a disruption to their carefully curated, modern life. They didn't want a mother, they wanted a silent servant who made the problems go away. One afternoon, Martha was folding laundry in the living room. She was humming a soft tune, an old habit that comforted her. Lisa walked in, holding a glass of wine, and stopped in the doorway. "Do you have to do that?" Lisa asked, her voice sharp. "Do what?" Martha asked, startled. "That humming. And the laundry. Can you do it in the laundry room? I'm trying to work in here, and you're always hovering." Martha put down the shirt she was folding. "I'm sorry, Lisa. I was just trying to help." "Helping is great, but we need space, Martha," Lisa said, emphasizing the use of her first name instead of Mom. "David and I need our privacy. This isn't your house. You can't just spread your things out everywhere." Martha looked around the room. Her things weren't spread out. They were confined to a small basket in the corner. But she knew there was no point in arguing. She gathered the laundry and hurried down to the basement, the cold, damp room that had now become her designated area. She felt small. She felt like a child being scolded, but she was a grandmother. The shame burned in her chest, hot and sharp. Dinner time became the hardest part of the day. It started with Martha setting the table for 3. But within the first week, that changed. One evening, she placed a plate of roasted chicken and vegetables down at the table setting next to David. Lisa walked in, picked up the plate, and moved it to the small kitchen island counter. "We're eating in here tonight, Martha," Lisa said. "We have some things to discuss that are adult topics. You wouldn't understand. You can eat at the counter." Martha stood there, stunned. "I can just eat in the sunroom," she whispered. "No, crumbs," David said, not even looking up from his phone. Martha ate her dinner standing up at the kitchen counter while David and Lisa sat at the dining table just a few feet away. They laughed, they talked about their plans for the weekend, and they drank wine. They acted as if she wasn't even there. Martha swallowed her food in hard lumps, forcing it down her throat to keep from crying. She had spent 30 years cooking family dinners for her son, making sure he felt loved and heard at the table. Now, she was an unwelcome guest in her own family's meal. But the emotional abuse was just the beginning. The real attack came when the mail arrived. Martha usually didn't get much mail, just bills and flyers. But one day, a letter from the pension office came. It sat on the hallway table. Martha saw David pick it up. He opened it, even though it had her name on it. A look of calculation crossed his face, not concern. He walked into the sunroom where Martha was reading a library book. "So, this is the pension amount?" David asked, holding up the letter. "Yes," Martha said quietly. "It's not much, but it covers my basic needs. David sat down on the edge of the pull-out couch, looming over her. Mom, we need to talk about finances. You're living here now. You're eating our food, using the electricity, the water. It's adding up. Martha's heart began to race. I told you, David. I don't have any savings left. The house took everything. I know that, David said, his voice hard. But you have this check coming in every month. It's not fair that Lisa and I pay for everything while you keep your pension for yourself. We have a mortgage, Mom. We're struggling a bit too. Martha looked at her son. He was wearing a new watch, and Lisa had just come back from a spa day. They weren't struggling, but she knew better than to say that. What do you want me to do? She asked. I think you should give us 80% of your pension check, David said casually. For room and board. That leaves you a little bit for, well, whatever you need. Toothpaste. Things like that. 80%, Martha gasped. That leaves me with almost nothing, David. Well, it's a roof over your head, he snapped. Do you know how much a nursing home costs? Do you know how much rent is? We're giving you a deal. Family helps family, right? So, you help us by paying your fair share. He didn't give her a choice. The next morning, David drove her to the bank. He stood right next to her at the counter while she set up an automatic transfer. Every month, the vast majority of her money would leave her account and go into David's. She watched the teller type in the numbers, feeling a piece of her soul being ripped away. That money was meant for her survival, for her independence. Now, it was funding David's lifestyle, and she was left with an allowance that barely covered a bus pass. She walked out of the bank feeling lighter in her purse but heavier in her heart. She was completely dependent on them now. As the months went by, Martha became more and more isolated. She didn't have the money to go out for coffee with friends or take a bus to the city. She was stuck in the house, cleaning up after them. She noticed that Lisa started to get bolder. One day, Martha went to look for her grandmother's silver locket, the only valuable thing she had left. She kept it in a small jewelry box on her nightstand. She opened the box, and it was gone. Her heart stopped. She looked everywhere. She walked into the living room where Lisa was sitting. Lisa, Martha asked, have you seen my silver locket, the one I keep on the table? Lisa didn't even look guilty. Oh, that old thing, I put it in the donation bag. It was all tarnished and ugly. I didn't think you wanted it. You need to stop hanging on to junk, Martha. It's cluttering up the house. You threw it away, Martha cried, her voice shaking. That was my grandmother's. It's all I have left of her. Well, it's gone now, Lisa said, turning the page of her magazine. Let it go. You have to move forward. Martha didn't believe her. She suspected Lisa sold it or kept it, but she had no power to fight back. She was just a poor old woman living in their sunroom. She went back to her room and cried into her pillow. She felt completely powerless. The breaking point didn't come with a shout. It came on a quiet Tuesday night. Martha had gone to bed early, exhausted from scrubbing the kitchen floor on her hands and knees because Lisa said the mop wasn't getting the grout clean enough. Around midnight, Martha woke up thirsty. She opened the door to the sunroom and heard voices in the kitchen. David and Lisa were still up. She crept closer, intending to just grab a glass of water and go back to her room, but their voices stopped her. I can't take it anymore, David, Lisa's voice whined through the air. She's always here. I have no privacy. I feel like I'm living in a retirement home. I know, babe, David said, sounding tired. But she paid the rent this month. We need that cash flow. It's not enough, Lisa snapped. Think about it, David. That sunroom, it's huge. If we kicked her out, we could turn that into a home gym. We could put in a Peloton and some weights. That's what we need. She has nowhere to go, Lisa, David said, though he didn't sound very concerned. So that's not our problem. There are state places. Government homes for people like her. People with no money. Yeah, David said slowly. She's costing us money in food, anyway. And to be honest, she's getting old. What if she gets sick? I don't want that mess in my house. Exactly, Lisa agreed. We should look into those homes. Maybe next month. Let's get one more rent check out of her, and then we find a place to dump her. Martha froze in the darkness of the hallway. The glass of water in her hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. They weren't just annoyed, they were plotting against her. They were planning to send her away to a state facility, a place where people go to die alone, just so they could build a gym. She realized then that they didn't see her as a mother. They saw her as a tenant who had outlived her usefulness. She slowly backed away from the kitchen door, careful not to make a sound. She returned to the sunroom and sat on the edge of her bed. The fear that had been paralyzing her for months began to harden into something else. It was a cold, hard lump of realization. David and Lisa were never going to love her again. They were never going to treat her with respect. If she stayed, they would drain her dry and then throw her away like trash. She was losing everything, but she realized that if she didn't do something soon, she would lose herself completely. She lay down in the dark, staring at the ceiling, no longer sad, but calculating. She knew she had to get out, but she didn't know how. The clock was ticking. The sound of shattering porcelain pierced the quiet afternoon like a gunshot. Martha jumped in her chair, the book she was reading falling to the floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she hurried toward the living room. The sound had come from the shelf near the fireplace, the shelf where Lisa kept her expensive ceramic collection. When Martha turned the corner, she froze. A large, blue vase lay in 100 jagged pieces on the hardwood floor. Standing over the mess was her grandson, little David, his eyes wide with terror. He held a soccer ball in his hands, looking guilty. It was an accident, the little boy whispered. I was kicking the ball inside. Martha rushed over, not looking at the mess, but checking him. Are you hurt? Did the glass cut you? She knelt down, taking his face in her hands. He shook his head, trembling. Just then, the front door flew open. Lisa and David walked in, carrying grocery bags. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw the white shards of ceramic scattered across the rug and Martha kneeling next to their son. What happened? Lisa shrieked, dropping her bags. An apple rolled across the floor. She ran to the shelf, staring at the empty space in horror. That was a limited edition piece. It cost $500. I broke it, little David stammered. I was playing soccer. Lisa spun around, her face turning a dark shade of red. She looked from her son to Martha. David, go to your room, she commanded. The boy didn't argue, he knew he was in trouble. He ran up the stairs, disappearing from sight. Martha slowly stood up, brushing off her knees. It was an accident, Lisa, Martha said gently. He was just playing. I can try to glue it. David stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. You were supposed to be watching him. That's why you are here, isn't it, to make sure he doesn't destroy the house? I was in the kitchen, Martha explained, her voice trembling. I just came in when I heard the crash. So you admit you weren't watching him, David snapped. This is exactly what I was talking about. You're losing it, Mom. You can't focus. You're becoming senile or something. You let a 6-year-old play soccer in the living room with $500 vases. I didn't let him, Martha cried, tears springing to her eyes. I didn't know. You can't blame me for everything. I can absolutely blame you. David shouted. He kicked a piece of the vase, sending it skittering across the floor. We work hard for this stuff. We give you a place to live, and you can't even do the one thing we ask of you. You're useless. You're actually costing us money by being here. It's just a vase, David, Martha pleaded. It's just a thing. It's not just a vase. Lisa screamed, stepping into Martha's face. It's respect. You have no respect for our home. You're clumsy, you're loud, and you're a burden. I want you out. I can't take this anymore. David didn't calm his wife down. Instead, he turned his back on Martha and walked toward the hallway closet. He returned a moment later, holding a large, battered suitcase. It was the same suitcase Martha had brought with her when she first moved in. He threw it on the floor in front of her. The heavy thud made Martha flinch. What are you doing? Martha asked, her voice barely a whisper. You heard her, David said coldly. You're out. I'm done parenting my parent. I'm done trying to fix your mistakes. You broke the vase, you pay the price. Get out. Martha stared at him, unable to process the words. Out where? I don't have anywhere to go. You took my money, remember, you took my pension. That's not my problem anymore, David said, checking his watch. You have 1 hour. Pack your stuff. If you aren't out of here in 60 minutes, I'm calling the police and telling them you're trespassing. David, please, Martha begged, falling to her knees. I'm your mother. I changed your diapers. I gave up everything for you. Please don't do this to me. David looked down at her, and for a second, Martha thought she saw a flicker of hesitation. But then Lisa put a hand on his arm, and his face hardened into stone. Don't try the guilt trip, Mom. It's too late. Pack. Martha stood up, her legs shaking so badly she could barely walk. She picked up the suitcase and walked to the sunroom. Her hands were trembling so violently that she couldn't zip the bag open at first. She looked around the small room that had been her whole world for months. What should she take? She had nothing left. She threw in her photo albums, the few clothes she had, and her toothbrush. She didn't have time to fold anything. She just shoved items in, sobbing quietly so they wouldn't hear her. She looked at the clock. 40 minutes left. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the door. She waited for David to come back in, to laugh and say it was a joke, to tell her to sit down for dinner. But the house was silent. The only sound was the zipper of her suitcase as she closed it. She felt like she was packing her own body into a bag. Exactly 60 minutes later, Martha walked into the living room. Lisa was sitting on the sofa, drinking a glass of wine, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up. David was by the door, holding his car keys. Come on, he said. I'm driving you. He didn't help her with the bag. Martha had to drag the heavy suitcase down the front steps, lifting it over the threshold one last time. She got into the passenger seat of his car. The leather was cold. They drove in silence. Martha watched the familiar streets pass by, the street where the elementary school was, the park where she used to take David when he was little. Every street was a memory, and every memory was a knife in her chest. "Where are we going?" Martha asked softly when they turned onto the highway. "Downtown," David grunted. "There's a shelter on 5th Street. They take people like you." "People like me," Martha repeated. "Your mother." "People with no money and no home," he corrected her. They drove through the rougher part of the city. The buildings became grimy, and the sidewalks were crowded with people pushing shopping carts. David pulled up in front of a large, brick building with a rusted metal door. People were standing outside, smoking and talking loudly. It looked like a scary place to Martha, who had lived a quiet, suburban life. "This is it," David said, putting the car in park. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He took out a $50 bill. He held it out to her. "Here. Take this. It should last you a few days. Don't come back to the house, Mom. We changed the locks. If you show up, I will call the police." Martha looked at the money, then at her son. "You're giving me $50 after you took thousands from me. You're leaving me here." "Good luck, Mom," he said, his voice flat. He didn't say "I love you." He didn't say goodbye. He just leaned over and opened her door. Martha stepped out onto the dirty sidewalk. She took her suitcase. Before she could say another word, David slammed the door shut. He stepped on the gas, the tires squealing on the pavement. Martha stumbled back, coughing on the exhaust fumes. She watched the tail lights of his car fade away into the darkness, getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared. She stood alone on the street corner. The wind was cold, cutting through her thin cardigan. She looked at the frightening building in front of her, then down at the crumpled $50 bill in her hand. She was totally, completely alone. The tears finally came, hot and fast, streaming down her face, but the noise of the city drowned out her sobs. She had nowhere to sleep. She had no one to call. Her son had just thrown her away like a piece of trash, and as the reality settled in, Martha felt the last bit of hope she was holding on to shatter, just like the blue vase on the floor. The heavy metal door of the shelter clicked shut behind Martha, sealing her off from the cold night air, but it didn't make her feel safe. Inside, the air smelled of bleach, old sweat, and damp wool. The noise was overwhelming, loud voices echoing off the high ceilings, babies crying, and the shuffling of feet on linoleum. Martha clutched her suitcase to her chest, feeling like a small child lost in a crowded train station. She had never been in a place like this. Her life had always been quiet, clean, and suburban. Now, she was surrounded by people who had nothing, just like her. A tired-looking woman with a clipboard sat at a desk near the entrance. She didn't look up. "Name?" she asked. "Martha," she whispered. "Last name?" the woman sighed. Martha told her. The woman stamped a form and pointed down the hall. "Dorm B, top bunk. Sheets are in the bin. Lights out at 10. No smoking, no alcohol. Breakfast is at 6, don't be late." Martha walked down the long hallway, her suitcase bumping against her legs. She found Dorm B. It was a large room filled with 20 metal beds, most of them already occupied by strangers. Martha felt a wave of panic wash over her. She found an empty bunk and threw her suitcase under it. She sat on the thin mattress, feeling the springs dig into her back. She didn't cry. She was too exhausted to cry. She just listened to the sounds of the room, the snoring, the coughing, the mumbling. She lay down, fully dressed, and pulled the rough wool blanket up to her chin. She stared at the water stains on the ceiling until her eyes burned. This was her life now. She had hit the very bottom. For the first 2 weeks, Martha moved like a ghost. She woke up when the lights flicked on at 5:30 a.m. She stood in line for the bathroom, waiting her turn to splash cold water on her face. She ate breakfast, watery oatmeal and stale toast at a long table with people who didn't look her in the eye. She spent her days walking the streets or sitting in the public library just to stay warm. She felt invisible. People on the street walked right past her, looking through her as if she didn't exist. She felt the shame of it every time she caught her reflection in a shop window. She looked old. She looked tired. But the shelter was also a place where stories were traded. One afternoon, Martha was sitting in the common room, trying to mend a tear in her coat with a needle she had found. A woman named Mrs. Higgins sat down next to her. Mrs. Higgins was probably 10 years older than Martha, with a sharp face and bright eyes. She had been living at the shelter for 6 months after her landlord sold her building. "You're good with that needle," Mrs. Higgins observed, watching Martha's nimble fingers. Martha shrugged. "I used to sew. I used to make my own curtains, even my daughter's wedding dress before she passed." Mrs. Higgins nodded. "We've all got stories, dear. But look around you. See that woman by the door? She was a teacher. That man over there used to own a construction company. We aren't trash, Martha. We're just in between chapters." Mrs. Higgins' words stuck with Martha. In between chapters. It made Martha realize that this wasn't the end of the book. David had written a terrible, cruel chapter for her, but he didn't own the pen. She still had a few pages left. She started paying attention to the flyers on the bulletin board near the shelter exit. Most were for free meals or legal aid, but one day, a bright yellow flyer caught her eye. It was for a seniors skills exchange at the local community center. It said, "Share your talent, learn something new, join the community." The next morning, instead of going to the library, Martha walked to the community center. It was a bright, noisy place full of activity. When she walked in, the coordinator, a young woman named Jessica, greeted her with a smile. "Hi there. Can I help you?" Martha hesitated, clutching her purse. "I saw the flyer. I can cook. And I can sew." Jessica's face lit up. "Really? We are desperate for help in the kitchen for the lunch program, and our sewing machine is broken because no one knows how to fix it. Are you free today?" Martha spent the next 4 hours chopping vegetables in a warm, steamy kitchen. For the first time in months, she felt useful. She showed the other volunteers how to peel potatoes without wasting too much, and she taught them a trick for peeling garlic quickly. They laughed and joked with her. They treated her like an expert, not a burden. When the lunch rush was over, Martha found the old sewing machine in the storage closet. She opened it up, fiddled with the bobbin, and cleaned out the dust. In 10 minutes, it was humming like new. Jessica watched her with her mouth open. "Martha, you are a lifesaver," she said. Over the next few weeks, Martha became a regular fixture at the center. She didn't have to pay for the bus because the center gave her a volunteer pass. She had a purpose again. She started hemming pants for the other seniors and fixing zippers on jackets. She felt her confidence coming back, drop by drop. One day, the owner of a small bakery down the street, Mr. Tom, came into the center to drop off a donation of day-old bread. He was arguing with someone on his phone about an order for a birthday party that had gone wrong. He sounded stressed. Martha overheard him saying he needed someone to decorate cupcakes, but his employee had quit. Without thinking, Martha walked up to him. "Excuse me, Mr. Tom, I can decorate cupcakes. I used to make wedding cakes for my friends. I'm very fast." Tom looked at her, skeptical. "You show me." He drove her to the bakery, handed her a piping bag, and watched. Martha's hands didn't shake. She piped perfect rosettes and delicate leaves onto the plain cupcakes. It was like riding a bike. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. When she finished, Tom stared at the tray. These are better than what my last guy did," he admitted. "Can you start tomorrow? It's minimum wage, cash in hand." Martha wanted to cry, but this time, they were happy tears. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes, I can." That job changed everything. It wasn't a fortune, but it was money that belonged to her. David couldn't touch it. Lisa couldn't take it. It was hers. She worked hard, standing on her feet for hours, but the ache in her back felt like a badge of honor. She saved every penny. She didn't buy new clothes or fancy coffee. She ate leftovers from the bakery and kept her head down. After 2 months, Martha had enough saved for first and last month's rent. She wasn't looking for a palace. She found a small advertisement in the back of the newspaper for a basement studio apartment. It was in an old house, owned by an elderly lady who just wanted a quiet tenant. The apartment was small. It smelled a little like mildew, and the windows were high up on the wall, letting in only slivers of light. The carpet was old and brown. But when Martha stood in the center of that room, she didn't see the flaws. She saw 4 walls and a door that locked. She signed the lease that afternoon. The landlady handed her a key. It was a heavy, brass key on a simple ring. Martha walked back to the shelter one last time to collect her suitcase. She didn't say goodbye to Mrs. Higgins, because she knew she would see her at the center. She just gathered her things and walked out. When she arrived at her new apartment, her hands were shaking as she put the key into the lock. It turned with a heavy clunk. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was silent. No one was yelling. No one was telling her she was in the way. No one was stealing her pension. She locked the door behind her and leaned against it, sliding down to sit on her own floor. She looked around the empty room. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, the air smelled like hope. Martha wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building a life. And this time, she was going to build it on her own terms. 6 months passed, and the seasons changed from the crisp chill of autumn to the biting cold of winter. But inside Martha's small studio apartment, the air was always warm and filled with the scent of cinnamon and fresh bread. The tiny space, which had once seemed like a downgrade from a mansion, now felt like a palace to Martha. She had bought bright yellow curtains to hang over the high windows, letting in every bit of sunlight possible. She had a small table by the window where she could drink her tea and look out at the street. She had a bed that was all hers, with soft pillows and a heavy quilt she had found at a thrift store. No one woke her up by yelling. No one moved her things. It was quiet, and it was peace. Martha's life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Every morning, she woke up before the sun, put on her comfortable walking shoes, and headed to the bakery. Mr. Tom had given her a raise after the holiday rush, telling her she was the best worker he had ever had. Martha took pride in her work. She decorated cakes with intricate flowers and perfectly piped words. She chatted with the customers who came in, many of whom started calling her grandma and saving her extra cookies. After work, she would stop by the community center to help with the sewing circle or just to have a hot lunch with her new friends. She wasn't just the poor lady anymore, she was Martha. She was talented, she was funny, and she was respected. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Martha was sitting at her small table, hemming a pair of trousers for one of the neighbors. The radio was playing soft jazz, and a pot of soup was bubbling on the hot plate. She felt content. She felt safe. Then, there was a heavy knock on her door. Martha paused, needle in mid-air. She wasn't expecting anyone. Mrs. Higgins usually called before coming over. Martha stood up slowly, smoothing her apron, and walked to the door. She looked through the peephole. Her heart skipped a beat. Standing in the dim hallway, shifting his weight from foot to foot, was David. He looked terrible. His coat was soaked from the rain, and he hadn't shaved in days. His hair was messy, and his eyes looked tired and red. Martha stared at him for a long moment. She felt a pang of sympathy, the old motherly instinct kicking in, but she quickly pushed it down. She remembered the shelter. She remembered the $50. She remembered the way he had looked at her like she was trash. She unlocked the door but left the chain on, opening it just a crack. "David," she said, her voice steady and calm. "Mom," he breathed out, leaning his forehead against the doorframe. "Oh, Mom. I found you. I didn't know where you went." "What do you want, David?" Martha asked. She didn't open the door wider. "Can I come in please? It's freezing out here, and I have to talk to you. It's important." Martha hesitated. She looked at his wet, sad face. Then, she took a deep breath and slid the chain off. She opened the door, but she didn't step back to let him in. She stood in the doorway, blocking his path. David seemed confused, but he didn't try to push past her. He looked into her apartment, his eyes scanning the small room. He saw the single bed, the hot plate, the pile of sewing. A look of pity crossed his face. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "You're living in a basement. Look at this place. It's not right. You can't live like this." "I'm very happy here, David," Martha said firmly. "Why are you here?" David dropped his shoulders. "It's over, Mom. Everything. Lisa, she left me. She filed for divorce last week." Martha waited, her face unreadable. "She took everything," David continued, his voice rising in panic. "She took the house, or at least she got it in the settlement. She took the new car. She cleaned out the bank accounts. I'm staying in a motel right now. I have nothing." Martha looked at him. She remembered how Lisa had looked at her, how they had plotted to send her away. "I'm sorry to hear that, David," she said genuinely. "Divorce is hard." "I don't know what to do," he said, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm all alone. The house is empty, and I'm losing it. I don't have a job right now because, well, things are messy. Mom, I need you. I need you to come back." Martha let out a short, Surprised laugh. Come back, David, you threw me out. You called the police on me. I know. I know I made a mistake. David cried, reaching out to grab her arm. I was stressed. Lisa was in my ear. I didn't mean it. You're my mother. You're the only one who cares about me. You can come back. We can get the house back, or get a new place. You can cook for us, and we can be a family again. You don't have to live in this hole. He gestured dismissively at her warm, cozy apartment. Martha gently pulled her arm away from his grip. She looked at her son, really looked at him. He wasn't asking for his mother. He was looking for a maid. He was looking for a nurse. He was looking for someone to fix the mess he made. He wasn't offering her love, he was offering her a job as his servant. No, David, she said softly. No, he blinked, shocked. What do you mean? No, you have to help me. Where will I go? You can't leave your son on the street. I didn't leave you on the street, Martha said, her voice gaining strength. You left me. Remember, you took my money. You took my pension. You dropped me off at a shelter with a suitcase and a $50 bill. I slept in a dorm room with 20 strangers, David. I ate soup in a line. I was cold, and I was scared. But you know what happened? David stared at her, his mouth slightly open. I survived, Martha said, standing tall. I found a job. I found this apartment. I found friends who actually respect me. I have a life now, David. A life where I am not in the way. A life where I am not a burden. I am happy. I haven't been this happy in years. But this isn't a life. David argued, his voice getting desperate. You're old. You shouldn't be working in a bakery. You should be with your family. I'm your family. My family is the people at the community center who helped me when I had nothing, Martha corrected him. My family is Mr. Tom, who treats me like a human being. You lost the right to call yourself my family when you locked the door on me. Please, Mom, he begged, tears streaming down his face. I have nowhere to go. Can I at least stay here for a few days just until I figure it out? Martha looked at him. This was the moment of truth. She could let him in. She could let him sleep on her floor. She could start cooking for him and cleaning up after him, and slowly, he would take over again. He would start criticizing her decorations. He would start demanding her pension check again. She stepped back into her apartment and picked up her umbrella from the stand. She handed it to him. There is a shelter on 5th Street, David. The same one you took me to. They have a hot meal at 6 o'clock. They will give you a bed for the night. David looked at the umbrella like it was a weapon. You're sending me to a shelter, your own son. I'm telling you where you can find help, Martha said. Because I cannot help you. Not anymore. But I need money, he blurted out. Just for the motel tonight. You have a job now. You have a pension. Martha laughed, but there was no humor in it, only steel. I earn minimum wage, David. And every cent goes to paying for this apartment and my food. I don't have any savings because you spent them all. I have nothing left to give you. You made sure of that. I'm your son. He screamed, losing his temper. You owe me. I owe you nothing, Martha said, her voice cutting through his anger like a knife. I gave you life. I gave you love. I gave you a down payment for your house. I gave you everything until the day you threw me out. The bank is closed, David. She stood in the doorway, her hand on the knob. She wasn't angry. She actually felt sorry for him, but it was a distant pity, like watching a bird that couldn't fly. He had to learn how to fly on his own, just like she did. David looked at her, realizing she wasn't going to budge. His face crumpled in defeat and humiliation. He grabbed the umbrella, turning away into the hallway. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. "You'll be alone when you die." Martha smiled a genuine, warm smile. "I'm not alone, David. I have myself. And that's enough." She watched him walk down the hallway, his wet shoes squeaking on the floor. He didn't look back. Martha waited until he reached the top of the stairs before she gently closed her door. She turned the lock, clicking it into place. She leaned her back against the wood and let out a long, deep breath. The air in the apartment was still warm. The soup was still bubbling. The jazz music was still playing. She walked over to her small table and sat back down. She picked up the trousers she was hemming and threaded the needle. Outside, the rain was falling, and her son was out in the cold, facing the consequences of his own actions. But Martha was safe. She was home. She picked up her tea and took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in her life, she was truly free. She had lost everything, but in the end, she had found herself. And that was a life worth living.